An elderly nun arrived at the community hall long before most people. She moved slowly, carefully placing each step as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. Her simple gray dress swayed softly as she walked, and in her hands she held a small old notebook wrapped in a cloth. It looked like something she had protected for many years. She pressed it close to her chest, as if it contained a part of her past she didn't want to lose. Inside the hall, people were setting up for a charity event. Volunteers carried boxes, adjusted lights, and arranged chairs in straight rows. Everyone seemed busy, but busy in a cheerful way. They were preparing for a special performance by a young pianist who had become quite popular in the town. His name was announced on the banners hanging around the hall, along with bright pictures that showed him smiling confidently beside a grand piano. The nun quietly stepped inside, looking around with soft eyes. She didn't take a seat right away. Instead, she walked up to the stage where the grand piano was placed. The piano looked polished and shining under the lights, as if it was waiting for something magical to happen. She approached one of the organizers, a tired-looking man who was trying to arrange some cables while talking to two volunteers. The nun gently cleared her throat and spoke softly. "Excuse me, may I play a short hymn before the program starts?" The man barely looked at her. He was too caught up in the rush. He waved his hand dismissively and said, "Sister, we have a schedule. The stage is all set. Please take a seat and enjoy the show." She simply nodded without arguing. She didn't look offended. If anything, she looked understanding. She knew people like him had a lot on their minds. She stepped back quietly and moved toward a chair near the wall. She placed her notebook on her lap and folded her hands over it, dot around her. A few young volunteers noticed her and whispered among themselves. One of them giggled softly, wondering why an old nun would want to touch the grand piano meant for a rising star. Another whispered that she must be confused or just looking for attention. Their words weren't cruel, but they carried the kind of thoughtless carelessness that often comes when people judge too quickly. The nun didn't react. She sat calmly, watching everyone work. Her eyes often drifted back to the piano. There was warmth in her gaze, as if the instrument reminded her of a memory she kept close to her heart. More people started to arrive. The audience filled the chairs, chatting and laughing. Children ran around while their parents tried to keep them quiet. The energy in the room grew lively, almost loud. But in the corner, the nun remained peaceful. Folding and unfolding the edge of her cloth-covered notebook after some time, the young pianist entered the hall. He walked confidently, greeting people who recognized him. Some clapped when they saw him, and others rushed to take pictures. He seemed used to the attention. He gave a small smile and headed straight toward the stage. When he stepped onto the platform, he glanced around, checking the piano, adjusting the bench, flipping through the pages of his music sheets. His movements were practiced, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Then he noticed the nun watching him. She wasn't staring, just looking with quiet interest. He raised his eyebrows lightly and smiled in a playful way. "Sister," he said, "do you also play?" The nun smiled gently. "Only a little, son." The pianist laughed softly. It wasn't meant to be rude. It was the kind of laugh that comes when someone thinks the other person is being humble or joking. He nodded politely and continued preparing. The nun went back to watching the piano as if it was speaking to her in its own silent language. Minutes passed, and everything seemed ready. The lights dimmed slightly, the audience settled down, and the host stepped up to introduce the event. Just as the young pianist was about to take his place at the bench, he suddenly froze. He checked his bag. He checked under the bench. He checked the side table. His main music sheet, the one he had practiced for weeks, was missing. His heart raced, and he whispered to the organizer, "I think I left it in the car. It'll take me 1 minute. Just keep them waiting." The organizer nodded nervously. The hall began to fill with murmurs as the pianist rushed out the side door. The host tried to keep the audience calm with light jokes, but the noise kept rising. People were tapping their feet, whispering and glancing at the stage. The organizers exchanged worried looks. They knew a restless crowd could turn the whole event uncomfortable. During the growing noise, the nun stood up slowly. She took her notebook in her hands and approached the stage again. Her steps were small, but steady. She gently touched the arm of one of the organizers and said, "If you wish, I can play for a minute," only to keep them from growing restless. The organizer hesitated. He looked at her fragile hands, her age, her simple clothes. He imagined the audience reacting badly if the music wasn't good. He imagined the embarrassment she might face. He didn't want to be responsible for making an elderly nun feel uncomfortable. "I'm not sure, sister," he whispered, but the noise in the hall grew louder. A few people were already complaining. A child began crying loudly. The organizer glanced around, worried the event was slipping out of control. He sighed deeply. "All right. Just for 1 minute. Please go ahead." The nun nodded with a quiet smile and stepped onto the stage. As she walked toward the piano, many people in the audience turned to look. Some raised their eyebrows. Others whispered, confused. A few even looked amused. One man muttered under his breath, "What is happening now? Is she going to pray or something?" A woman near the front whispered, "Maybe she knows a little tune. Let's just see." The nun reached the piano and stopped for a moment. She placed her notebook beside her, as if sharing the moment with an old friend. Then she pulled the bench closer and sat down carefully. Her feet barely touched the ground, and her back curved gently as she leaned forward. She took a slow breath. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from age. She rubbed her fingers together, warming them like someone preparing for something delicate. People watched with mixed expressions, curiosity, confusion, even a bit of impatience. The nun lowered her head and touched the keys with the gentleness of someone greeting a loved one after many years. She pressed one single note. It rang through the hall with a deep, warm sound, much richer than anyone expected. The conversations in the audience faded instantly. The crying child stopped. Even the volunteers who had laughed earlier straightened up. Surprised. The nun kept her fingers on the keys for a moment, feeling the vibration through her palms as if listening to a voice only she could hear. That first note was not loud. It was not flashy. But it carried something pure, something that made people pause without knowing why. She closed her eyes for a brief second, like someone remembering a long-lost moment, and prepared to play the next note. And in that silent hall, everyone suddenly understood that this simple old nun might not be as ordinary as they first imagined. The hall went completely silent after that first note. It was as if everyone there had forgotten they were at a charity event. Even the people who were half listening at the back straightened up, curious about what would happen next. The elderly nun kept her fingers on the piano for a moment. Her eyes remained closed as she took a soft breath. Then she began to play. Her hands, though wrinkled and slightly trembling, moved across the keys with surprising grace. The gentle hymn she started with rose softly, filling every corner of the hall. It wasn't flashy or loud. It wasn't the kind of music people usually clap for. But there was something deeply pure in the way she played, something honest and heartfelt, as if every note carried a memory. The audience felt it instantly. The restless energy that had filled the room disappeared completely. People leaned forward in their seats. A few even held their breath without realizing it. A woman in the second row clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with emotion. A man near the aisle wiped his eyes quickly, trying to hide it from others. The volunteers who had whispered earlier stood frozen, staring at the stage with wide eyes. None of them had expected anything like this, not from a woman they had barely noticed before. The nun's music didn't rush. Each note flowed into the next like a peaceful stream. It felt like a story told by someone who had lived a long life and wanted to share a part of her heart without saying any words. Some people felt warmth. Some felt sadness. Others felt a strange sense of comfort they couldn't explain. Just then, the young pianist pushed open the side door of the hall. He walked in with his missing music sheet in his hand, ready to begin his performance. But the moment he stepped inside, he froze. The entire hall was silent, and a soft, beautiful melody floated through the air. He turned his head toward the stage and saw the nun sitting at the piano, her small figure leaning gently over the keys. Her hands moved with a flow he recognized instantly. This was not a beginner. This was someone with deep experience. He took a slow step forward, listening more carefully. The purity of her playing made his chest tighten. He had played in many events, competitions, and recitals. Yet there was something different about the way she made the piano sing. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a prayer, a memory, a story. All at once, the audience, unaware of his return, continued watching the nun with full attention. The young pianist stayed near the entrance, not wanting to break the moment. For the first time in a very long while, he felt humbled by someone he had underestimated. On the stage, the nun moved into a soft, emotional part of the hymn. Her fingers glided over the keys in a way that brought images to mind sunlight through old windows. Children sitting in a small room, a pair of hands guiding little fingers on the piano. Her music felt like home to people who had never even met her dot as she played. The young pianist noticed something else. Her hands didn't just move. They remembered. They remembered years of practice, hours of teaching, perhaps even moments of joy and pain that she never spoke about. He felt a lump in his throat as he realized this elderly nun was not only a musician, she was a master of emotion. The last note of the hymn lingered in the air like a soft whisper. When it finally faded, the entire hall remained silent for a few seconds. It wasn't the awkward kind of silence. It was the kind that happens when people need a moment to come back to the present after being taken somewhere else. Then the applause began. It started softly, from a few people in the front. Then it grew louder as more hands joined in. Soon the whole hall stood up, clapping and cheering. Some people even whistled. The elderly nun looked surprised at first. She hadn't expected applause. She simply smiled gently. Lowering her head slightly as a sign of gratitude, the volunteers who had doubted her earlier clapped the hardest. A few exchanged embarrassed glances, realizing how wrong they had been. The organizer, who had hesitated to let her play, felt a wave of relief wash over him. What he had feared would embarrass the event had instead become its brightest moment. The young pianist slowly walked toward the stage. The crowd parted automatically, letting him through. He climbed the steps and approached the nun with genuine respect. He didn't speak right away. He simply stood there, letting the applause fade. When the hall finally quieted again, he leaned slightly toward her and said softly, "Sister, that was beautiful." The nun gave him a kind smile. "Thank you, son. I only played a small hymn my heart won't forget." He replied honestly. The audience watched this exchange, feeling touched by the moment. The pianist then turned to the crowd and said, "I know everyone is waiting for my performance, but I think we should take a moment to appreciate what we just witnessed. Music like that comes from years of devotion and love." People clapped again, not loudly this time, but respectfully, almost gently. The pianist looked at the nun once more. "May I ask, where did you learn to play like that?" The nun looked down at her hands, smiling softly. "Many years ago I worked at an orphanage. The children there had very little, so I used to play for them to help them sleep, to help them smile, to help them feel safe. Music was our way of forgetting our troubles for a while." The hall grew quiet as she spoke. Her words weren't dramatic or heavy. They were simple, honest, and filled with warmth. People could feel the sincerity behind them. "I never had fame or big stages," she continued. "But those little ones, they were my audience. And for them I played every day." The young pianist felt a deep respect for her. Suddenly, all his trophies and medals seemed smaller compared to the quiet strength this elderly nun carried. He gently asked, "Would you teach me that hymn someday?" The nun nodded with a soft laugh. "Of course. Music is meant to be shared." The pianist helped her stand from the bench. The audience watched as she stepped down from the stage, holding her old notebook again. But now she wasn't invisible. People looked at her with admiration, not curiosity or doubt. As she walked back to her seat, several members of the audience approached her to thank her. A mother told her that the music reminded her of her own childhood. An older man said it brought back memories of his mother singing to him. A young woman said the music made her cry in a good way. The nun listened to every word with kindness, never once acting proud or superior. The event continued, and the young pianist performed his prepared pieces beautifully. But even he knew that the most unforgettable moment of the night had come before his first note. Everyone knew it. After the show ended, people began leaving the hall, still talking about the nun's unexpected performance. Some said they had never felt so peaceful listening to a piano. Others said they wished they had recorded the hymn so they could hear it again. The nun walked slowly toward the exit, holding her notebook close. The young pianist caught up with her near the door. "Sister," he said softly, "thank you for reminding me why I started playing music in the first place." She smiled gently. "And thank you for letting me play." Before leaving, she added, "Remember, music is not just about skill. It's about the heart." The pianist nodded, feeling those words sink in deeply. He knew he would carry them with him for a long time. The nun stepped out into the cool night air. The soft glow of the streetlights fell on her peaceful face. She took a slow breath, listening to the quiet around her. She didn't need applause or praise. She had shared a piece of her heart, and that was enough. As she walked away, the echoes of her hymn seemed to linger in the hall behind her. Everyone who heard it would remember the moment an elderly nun ignored at first had changed the entire evening with just one note.